All right, testing, testing, testing. I'm live, testing. I'm live, I'm live, I'm live. Got to come through, make sure that everything's good over here. All right, so I'm going to give you guys a few moments. All right. All right, so I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. So everything's good. All right, so peace and power and elevation be to all you beautiful people out there. This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. And so tonight's topic is going to be dealing with comparative methods versus the mass comparison methods, right? So I want to thank everybody subscribing to my channel, sharing my channel, like my channel, all that stuff. So this is my response to Wu Jiao. Okay, so I watched Wu Jiao's video on his previous channel. I mean, on his previous, on his page, which is the Sheshu Medu Nature page. I think that's what it's called. Okay, so I've seen the video and I got a chance to watch all of it, listen to whatever he had to say. But one part he mentioned was about the model, right? Regarding to Afro-Asiatic. He mentioned that Greensburg model was incorrect, okay? Which was the mass comparison model, all right, about Afro-Asiatic. It was incorrect. So, and his hypothesis was rejected, right? So, but I mean, the question becomes, if it was rejected, then why is the concept still being used today? So now the question becomes what is comparative method versus mass comparison? So that's what I'm going to look at. And then I have some books. I have lots of information. All right. And I'm not going to be able to go through all the information. Okay. So we're just going to focus on Afro-Asiatic languages models. All right, so this is the response to Wu Jiao's video. And if you guys are watching, you guys can share this video and comment or whatever you want to do. All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about it. Let's talk about what is comparative linguistics. But before I go there, I want to show you guys what comparative linguistics is. Okay. So here's the information posted up. Let me get that off of there. All right. So according to the information, you can find this you can find it on Wikipedia. You can find it on psychology.phantom.com. Okay. It says comparative linguistics, originally comparative philology, is a branch of historical linguistics which is concerned with comparing languages in order to establish their historical relatedness. Now, relatedness implies a common origin or proto-language, and comparative linguistics aim to reconstruct proto-languages and specify the changes which have resulted in the document languages. In order to maintain a clear distinction between attested and reconstruction form, comparative linguists prefix an asterisk to any form which is not found in surviving text. All right, so it says the fundamental technique of comparative linguistics is the comparative method, which aims to compare phonological system, morphological system, syntax, and the lexicon. All right, so what is the lexicon? The lexicon is the word. Syntax deals with the meaning. Morphology or morphological system deals with the structure of the word or the symbol, etc., how it's being structured. Okay, and phonological system deals with the sounds. Okay, like phonics. Phonics is the sound. Morphology deals with the physical. Remember that. Syntax deals with the meaning. Lexicons deals with the word. All right, that's the comparative method. But watch where I'm going with this, okay? So in principle, every difference between two related languages should be explicable to a high degree of plausibility and systematic changes. For example, in phonological or morphological system are expected to be highly regular, although the proto-languages reconstructed by the comparative methods are hypothetical. A reconstruction may have predictive power. The most notable example of this is Saussures' proposal that the Indo-European consonant system contained laryngeals, a type of consonant attested in no Indo-European language known at the time. So the hypothesis was vindicated with the discovery of Hittites, which proved to have exactly the constant Saussure had hypothesized in the environments he had predicted. Okay. All right. So down here, as you can see, it says there are other branches of linguistics, which involves comparing language, linguistic typology. You got contact linguistics, right? And you got contrastive linguistics, okay, which compares languages usually with the aim of assisting languages learning by identifying important differences between the learner's native and target languages. Okay, so contrastive linguistics deals solely with present-day languages. All right, then. So now you go down here, look up comparative method. As you can see, what it says, comparative method is a method used to detect genetic relationships between languages and to establish a constant relationship hypothesis by reconstructing. Okay. All right. So it's asked, how does comparative method work? Let me get all this off of here. So how comparative methods work? Although there is no concrete set of steps to be followed in the application of comparative method, linguists generally agree on the basic steps which are followed. A simple cognate list. Relationship between two or more languages can be suspected if they show a number of regular correspondence in lexicon, which means that there is a regularly recurring match between the phonetic structure of words with similar meanings, right? Thus, this step simply involves making lists of words which are likely cognates among the languages being compared. Okay, so for example, the Polynesian family. So it shows the example of the Polynesian language, right? So when you look down, you see the Polynesian language. Okay, so now you gotta go down to number 2, establish the corresponding set. So once cognate lists are established, the next step is to determine the regular sound correspondence they exhibit. The notion of regular correspondence is very important here. Mere phonemic similarity as between English day and Latin dies with the same meaning has no probative value. All right, so English initial D does not regularly match Latin D, and whatever sporadic matches can be observed are due either to chances or to borrowing. Okay. Now here's the third one. It says discover which set are complementary distribution. During the time the comparative method was being developed, two major developments occurred which improved the method's effectiveness. First, it was found that many sound changes are conditioned by a particular context. Thus, for example, in both Greek and Sanskrit, an aspirated stop involved in an unaspirated one, but only if a second aspirated occurred later on in the same word. This is the so-called Grassmann's law, known to ancient Indian grammarians and promulgated as a historical discovery by Hermann Grassmann. All right. And so it then goes on to say reconstruct proto-phonemes, right? So reconstruct proto-phonemes. This step tends to be much more subjective than the previous one. A linguist here has to rely mostly on their general intuition about what types of sound changes are likely and which are unlikely. For example, the voicing of voiceless possessive between vowels is an extremely common sound change occurring in languages all over the world. All right. Now, it is important to keep in mind, however, that there are sometimes changes that are extremely unexpected. The Proto-Indo-European word for two, for example, is reconstructed as duo, which is reflected in classical Armenian as Erku. Several other cognates demonstrate the change D, E, R, K in the history of Armenian was a regular one. Okay. So then it goes down, it continues on, it says examine the reconstruction system typologically, all right, which is in the final step. The linguists take all the proto-phonemes they have reconstructed using in step 1 through 4 and check to see how the system fits with what is currently about typological constraints. Okay. All right. So if you guys or if anybody that deals with MetaNet, right, and that said they deal with comparative method, do they follow those steps? Do they follow those basic principles? All right. So if they follow those principles, basically they're hypothesizing because they don't exactly know how the language is supposed to be spoken and how it's supposed to be done because they're only going by hypothesis. But it has to go through the process of verification to verify that. So you could argue that Greenberg had hypothesized Afro-Asiatic, but it has been widely accepted by the mainstream because other people use the comparative methods to be able to validate his point. Okay? They have done that. So other linguists accept that more than they would accept what other people say. So for those who scream out the concept of Negro Egyptian, if you use that concept of Negro Egyptian, right, you have to be able, okay, go through that verification process. You have to be able to show and prove. Or otherwise, you're just basically disagreeing with the argument of Joseph Greenberg. You're basically disagreeing because you're coming from a biased state. Because you don't like the term Afro-Asiatic. That's just basically what it is. So you guys don't like the term Afro-Asiatic. You say, well, you know what? That's not a good terminology. We're going to dish that out and call it Negro Egyptian. Well, exactly. What is a Negro Egyptian? The question becomes, what is Negro Egyptian? How did that come into existence? That's what we got to figure out here. How did that come into existence? How did y'all come up with that concept? But let's continue. So, let's go on to the next page. Let's go on to the next thing. Let's go on to the mass comparison. All right. So right here. Ooh, wee. The heck? All right, Bumpy. All right, so right here, it talk about mass comparison by Joseph Greenberg, which was developed by him. And we're going to go into who Joseph Greenberg is in a minute. So mass comparison is a method that was developed by Joseph Greenberg to determine the level of genetic relatedness between languages. It is now usually called multilateral comparison. The method is rejected by most linguists. Keyword is rejected by most linguists. Not all linguists reject mass comparison. Most of them reject it, okay? Not all of them. Okay, so yeah, again, it was not rejected by everyone. There are people that still, so that goes to show you that people still use the mass comparison. But check this out. Some of the top level relationship Greenberg named are generally accepted. So it is now generally accepted, though they have already been positioned by others. For example, Afro-Asiatic and the Niger-Congo. Okay. Others are accepted by many, though disputed by some prominent specialists. Nilo-Saharan. All right. So others are predominantly rejected, but have some defenders, which is Euro-Asiatic, while others are almost universally rejected. Okay. So it goes on to say, the methodology. The thesis of mass comparison is that a group of languages is related when they show numerous resemblance in vocabulary, including pronouns and morphemes, forming an interlocking pattern common to the group. Unlike the comparative method, mass comparison does not require any regular or systematic correspondence between the languages compared. All that is required is an impressionistic feeling or of similarity. Greenberg does not establish a clear standard for determining relatedness. He does not set a standard for what he considers a resemblance or how many resemblances are needed to prove relationships. Okay? And it says, mass comparison is done by setting up a table of basic vocabulary items and their forms in the languages to be compared for resemblance. The table can also include common morphemes. The following table was used by Greenberg. Okay. So they talk about the essay in linguistics. That's one of the books that he had written. Let's go back. Hold up. Wait a minute. I just lost it. Give me a moment. I just lost it. Okay, so I'm back. All right, sorry about that. So going down to what I was reading. Let me try that again because I had clicked out by accident. The thesis of mass comparison is that a group of languages is related when they show numerous resemblances in vocabulary, including pronouns and morphemes, right? Forming an interlocking pattern common to the group, right? Unlike the comparative method, mass comparison does not require any regular or systematic correspondence between the languages compared. All that is required is an impressionistic feeling or similarity. Greenberg does not establish a clear standard for determining relatedness. He does not set a standard for what he considers a resemblance or how many resemblances are needed to prove relationship. Okay, so mass comparison is done by setting up a table of basic vocabulary items and their forms in languages to be compared for resemblance. The table can also include common morphemes. The following table was used by Greenberg in 1957, page 41. All right, so to illustrate the technique, it shows the forms of 6 items of basic vocabulary in 9 different languages identified by letters. Okay, so As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and let me look up the book. Hold on. All right, so I'm gonna open up one of the books that Greenberg written in 1957. So once I can pull it up, okay. And the page number is page number is 41. And shout out to the chat. Peace to the chat. What's going on? All right, so let's look at page 41 in this book. So this book is called Essays in Linguistics, right? Okay. So let's look at page 41. Let's see how he used his comparative methods. All right, so right here, this is page 41. And according to his book, right? According to his book, it says the method for discovering valid relationship described here may be summarized as resting on two main principles: the relevancy of form, meaning resemblance in morphemes, to the exclusion of those based on form only, meaning only, and meaning only, and the technique of group comparison of languages. All right. So going down to here, this is what he was using. All right, so this is what they was talking about when they said this methodology is outdated. Okay, so that's the table. This is the mass comparison method that Greenberg was using. Okay, so this is what's rejected by most of the linguists. Now, some of the linguists still use it to this day, but it's mostly rejected by most of them. All right. All right, then. So let me go ahead and get out of that because I got to keep it moving. But let's talk about genetic relationship. So let's go down to here where it says genetic relationship. All right, so genetic relationship, right? The two languages have a genetic relationship and belong to the same language family. If both are descended from a common ancestor or one is descended from the other, the term of the process of language evolution are independent of and not reliant on the terminology, understanding, and theories related to biological genetics. And to avoid confusion, some linguists propose to replace this with a genealogical relationship. Okay, and how do you develop that genetic relationship? Because you have to look at the cultural relationship. All right, you have to look at the people in that environment, in that region, in that area. So the question becomes, how can there be a relationship with the Negro Egyptian language? Where is the genetic relationship at in this case? when you describing the Negro Egyptian language, where is that genetic relationship? Because you can see there's a lot more genetic relationship with what is called Afro-Asiatic languages. When you look at the Hebrew, the Arabic, and the Ge'ez language, and the ancient Egyptian language, you can see the relationship because of the region and their environment and that proximity of their area. Those areas surrounding each other. Okay. But when you start talking about Negro Egyptian, you try to go all the way to West Africa and go down to the southern part of Africa and stuff. Where is the comparison and where is the genetic relationship? Have you really studied the culture of the people there? Have you studied how they got in contact with one another? Where did you get that? How did you draw that conclusion? How did you draw the conclusion? That's the question. How did people draw their conclusion? Now, again, and I'm going to ask this question. Ooh, hold on. Again, I'm going to ask this question. Are you guys, for those of you who claim to be linguists, right, of the Medu language, are you willing to have a public forum with those who are actual linguists from various universities and challenge their consensus and challenge their argument? Are you willing to go up and debate them for the public? If you're not willing to do that, then I know where you stand on your position. So I just need to know, are you willing to have a public forum debate with actual linguists? I'm not talking about the people within the conscious community. I'm talking about those outside the conscious community. I'm talking about Egyptologists. I'm talking about anthropologists, linguists, historians. Are you willing to have actual debates with those people about languages, about the Afro-Asiatic language? That's all I want to know. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and continue on with some more stuff. Okay. So I got to continue on. So I'm going to continue on with the next phase of this subject. Now, this is one of Joseph Greenberg's book right here. It's called The Languages of Africa by Joseph H. Greenberg, right? Okay, and it was written in 1963. Okay, so he talked about the methodology of language classification, Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Khoisan, Gari now, Neo-Saharan, and Cardo language, etc. All right, so on here, he talks about the present volume contains a complete genetic classification of languages of Africa. All right. So there are three fundamentals of method underlying the present classification. The first of these is the sole relevance in comparison of resemblance. involving both sound and meaning in specific form. A resemblance in sound only, for example, the presence of a tonal system as such, or in meaning only, as in the existence of morphemes, right? Meaningful forms indicating sex, gender, but without phonetic similarity are irrelevant. All right. The second principle is that of mass comparison as against isolated comparison between pairs of languages. The third is the principle that only linguist evidence is relevant in drawing conclusion about classification. This last is so self-evident when stated it would be unnecessary. In fact, disregard of this principle is very common and a subtle source of errors in classification in Africa and elsewhere, as will be shown later. Okay, so this is his book right here. He goes into like different the languages of Africa and talk about his comparative method that he used at the time, which was the mass comparison, etc. Okay, so this book right here is called Linguistic Ties Between Ancient Egyptian and Bantu, Uncovering Symbolic Affinities and Relationship in Vocabularies by Fergus Sharman. So what I'll do is I'm gonna hold on to that. I'm gonna come back to that. All right, and then here's another article. It's called Scientific Data, Cross-Linguist Data Formats, Advancing Data Sharing and Reuse in Comparative Linguistics. Okay, so let's see what they're talking about. It was published on October the 16th, 2018. Okay, so it says, introduction. The last 2 decades have witnessed a dramatic increase in language data, not only in form of monolingual resources for the world's biggest languages, but also in form of cross-linguistic data set, which try to cover as many of the world languages as possible, right? Creating data set in linguistics is currently in vogue, and apart from traditional ways of linguistic data collection in form of etymological dictionaries, user dictionaries, and grammatical surveys, data are now being published in form of online data. Okay. And let me see where I'm at. Oh, and online apprentices or supplements to publish papers addressing topics as diverse as cross-linguistic lexical association, right? Etymologically, a noted words list for large languages family like Austronesian and Indo-European. So you know, they talk a lot about the Indo-European. So when the comparative method came about, they used a lot more on the Indo-European languages than they did with the Afro-Asiatic language. But as we can see here, but let's continue. Okay. It says Indo-European or grammatical features compare across a large sample of the world's languages. Along with the increase in the amount of data, there is also increased interest in linguistic questions with scholars from both linguistic and non-linguistic disciplines, which is like archaeology, anthropology, biology, economics, and psychology. Now, trying to use linguistic data to answer a wide variety of questions of interest to their discipline. For example, large-scale cross-linguistic studies have recently been conducted to test how robustly languages are transmitted and which forces drive change. Cross-linguistic data have proven useful to detect semantic structure which are universal across human population and how semantic systems like color terminology have evolved. Another group of studies have analyzed cross-linguistic data using quantitative phylogenetic methods of investigating when particular languages families starts to diverge. Cross-linguistic studies have been explored proposed non-linguistic factors shaping languages, from climate to population size to genes, and how these factors may or may not shape human social behavior at a society level, right? And it said, despite this gold rush in the creation of linguistic database and their application reflected in a large number of scholarly publications and an increased interest in the media, linguistic data are still far away from being fair in the sense of Wilkinson, findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable. It is still difficult. It's still very difficult to find particular data set since linguistics journals often do not have a policy on supplementary data and may lack resources for hosting data on their servers. It is also often difficult to access data and many papers which are based on original data and are still being published without the data. And having to request the data from the authors is sometimes a more serious obstacle than it should be. Due to idiosyncratic formats, linguistic data set also often lack interoperability and are therefore not reusable. Okay, so let's look at down here. It said, despite the large diversity of human languages, often linguistic data can be represented by very simple data types, which are easy to store and manipulate. Word lists and grammatical survey, for example, can usually be represented by triples of language feature and value. The simplicity, however, is deceptive as there are too many degrees of freedom, which render most of the data that have been produced hard to compare. Due to the apparently simple structure, scholars rarely bother with proper serialization. Assuming that their data will be easy to reuse. Although there are recent and long-standing standardization efforts like the establishment of the International Phonetic Alphabet as a unified alphabet for phonetic transcription, which goes back to the end of the 19th century, or the more recent publication of references catalogs for languages and word meanings. Linguists often forego these standards when compiling their data set and use less strictly specified documentation tradition. Okay. So while certain standards, such as the usage of unified transcription system, are generally agreed upon but not often applied or misapplied in practice, other types of linguistic data come along with a multitude of different standards, which make data interoperability extremely difficult. All right. It says, at the same time, funding agencies such as the German Academic Research Council emphasize that the use of open or openly documented formats to enable free public access to data deriving from research should be the norm. Mirroring the European Research Council guidelines for open access to research data in the Horizon 2020 program, since the importance of the cross-linguistic data is constantly increasing, it is time to reevaluate and improve the state of standardization of linguistic data. You know what? And that's something, it's amazing that I came across this information here, to be honest with you, because I was actually looking for something else. But you know what? This is very useful for those who actually writing books and studying linguistics, such as studying the ancient Egyptian language. I mean, this is something you guys can look up or read on, you know, as far as the scientific data, as far as the cross-linguistic data formats and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, that's very interesting. And this came from nature.com, scientific data. Pretty useful. All right. So here's a book called The Comprehensive Introduction of Nostratic Comparative Linguistics, which deals with the Indo-European language. But yeah, so this is written by Alan R. Baumhart. Okay, this came out in 2021. All right, so now let's go into the summary reports, Linguistic Change and Reconstruction in the Afro-Asiatic Languages by Stephen J. Lieberman. Yes, Stephen J. Lieberman. All right, so it says the Afro-Asiatic phylum includes both parts of that human speech, which is preserved in some of man's earliest written documents, and languages which are currently used by only a few speakers and have not yet been adequately recorded by linguists. The difference between the epistemological grounds on which we base our linguistic description and the historical reconstruction which draw on such description provide both benefits and hindrances to the modern assessment of linguistic change in these languages and in the application of the comparative method to them. Okay, so it says the chief benefit may well be diversity of methodological perspective and interest which the scholars working on the languages bring to their task. The principal hindrance is surely but the other side of this phenomenon, a divergence in goals, modes of expression, and means of communication that is so great that it is hard to speak of those linguists who devoted themselves to the study of these languages as constituting a single coherent group without at least some exaggeration. All right. So let's continue. And it says, sketching a bit of the background of the modern study of Afro-Asiatic sheds light on the state of historical and comparative study of these languages. Having employed the term family for branches of this group of languages for so long, many agree to call the group as a whole a phylum. The distinction between these labels is not linguistically significant. Just like the contrast between language and dialect, it grows from the accidental historical events rather than some analytic, systematic distinction. To the best of our knowledge, writing first began in areas which are now populated by speakers of Afro-Asiatics. It is true, of course, that Sumerians are commonly given credit for the earliest written records, but the development of cuneiform, if I'm saying it right, writing into a viable tool for the recording of speech apparently took place with the help of stimulus of Semitic speech. Whether the creation of Egyptian hieroglyphic writings was occasioned by contact with Mesopotamia, as most scholars think or not, it is its conservative nature and the fact that in its standard usage it does not reveal the vocalic parts or patterns of words mean that much of the information a linguist would like to have for historical and comparative work is not recorded in the orthography. Okay, so of these two families known from ancient sources, Egyptian does not have any successor language which is still spoken, even if Coptic is still used in the liturgy of the Egyptian church. On the other hand, various branches of the Semitic family continues in everyday use. Children learn forms of Arabic, Aramic, Ethiopic, Hebrew, and South Arabian from their families, while Ge'ez is used much like Coptic. The earliest adequately attested Semitic tongues, such as Akkadian, right, Amorite, Abalite, Phoenician, and Ugaritic are no longer spoken, and invariably the varieties of Semitic which are employed in everyday speech are quite different from what we find in the earliest records. Okay, now going down, it says the other families in the phylum are known only from relatively recent sources. The meager pre-modern records that we have for Berber, Cushitic, Omatic, which most now distinguished from the rest of the Cushitic, Beja apparently likewise to be separate from Cushitic and Chaditic, are of but little help in reconstruction without the information on the languages from these families that resulted from study of them during the last 100 years. Languages known from field work rather than book learning and the study of manuscripts can obviously be known with more precision. But the differences in methods employed by those investigating these two commonly coincide with or leads to diversion in linguist interests. Okay. All right. So the responsibilities of the two groups of linguists working on the phylum are different, and their responses to those duties are behind the diversion in their methods and the types of questions they raise. All right, I'm back. Outside of the Chadidic family, there are about 100 known Afro-Asiatic languages. Outside of the Chadidic family, there are about 100 known Afro-Asiatic languages. The addition of Chadidic more than doubles that total and may even triple it, but the number of Chadidic languages that have been adequately described is considerably less than 3 dozen. The need to record languages before the inroads of contemporary nationalistic culture and modern means of communication extinguish these languages is a high priority for linguists working with them, and is of course with the interest of much of the contemporary linguistics and anthropology, both in terms of topic and approach. Okay, now it said linguists working with such languages generally employ historical and comparative grammar primarily in order to organize and consolidate their materials and to gain some grasp of the larger whole, rather than out of an interest founded in the reconstruction of linguistic history or prehistory. Okay, so it says, on the other hand, scholars who are interested in studying the earliest stage of development in the phylum reasonably turn their sight towards those languages which are known from the earliest record, and in fact commonly come to linguistics as an aid to their understanding to preserve text rather than vice versa. They are not infrequently then primarily philologists. Given the great historical importance of some of the Afro-Asiatic languages and their continuing cultural significance, this may not be remarkable, but it has a significant effect on the types of work that these scholars do, particularly since many of the historical questions and texts involved are part of or gain contemporary meaning from their connection with Western religious heritage. All right, so I'm gonna stop right there. Okay, I'm gonna stop right there. So this is a summary report called Linguistic Change and Reconstruction in the Afro-Asiatic Languages by Stephen J. Liberman. All right, so my question is, how many Medu Neter teacher actually sat down with anthropologists and historians to come up with the understanding about the Afro-Asiatic family and the language? How many people actually done it? That's what I want to know. I am curious to know how many Medu Neter scholars or teacher actually dealt with the archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, and linguists to actually come up with a better understanding of Afro-Asiatic languages. Because it seems like those who have disagreement about Afro-Asiatic languages, right, they don't have enough understanding of how it came into existence, besides the fact that Greenberg came up with the mass comparison, but not really understand what was the relationship like of that environment and the people. So the thing is, okay, are you guys sure that Afro-Asiatic language is not the proper lingua franca or the proper language family? Or are you guys just hypothesizing? Because at this point, if you're a linguist, you're studying a language that's a dead language, because let's be honest, Medu Neter, which is ancient Egyptian language, right? It's a dead language. And the only language that is surviving from the Medu Neter language is Coptic. So Coptic is the only surviving language. So now, how can't you be sure to bring that language back alive and being able to use it as a language of speech, as a language of communication, if you're not really sitting down and actually dealing with those who are linguists and dealing with those who are anthropologists and how to come up with better techniques? You know what I'm saying? How to be able to better understand Afro-Asiatic models without being so quick to reject it and say, well, this is not the correct model. Well, so how do you know it's not the correct model? How do you know Negro Egyptian is the correct model? How do you know that for a fact? So basically, you're just using hypothesis, right? So are you really sure that it's not correct, or are you just hypothesizing? And what information or what reliable sources do you have to be sure that Afro-Asiatic is not the correct information, or it's not the correct family filing? What information do you have besides using it as a Negro Egyptian language? Besides saying it's Negro Egyptian? And then what source do your teacher have to prove it for those who learn from others like Theophile Banga and John Mboli and all the rest of them? What information, how did they come up with that conclusion that Negro Egyptian is not the correct language? I mean, Afro-Asiatic is not the correct family language, but Negro Egyptian is. How did they come up with that conclusion? Did they use comparative methods? Did they actually use comparative methods to compare these languages together? How did they come up with that conclusion? Because what it sounds like to me is just a form of hypothesis. It's just a form of hypothesis. It's not really conclusive at this point. It has not been validated to be conclusive. It's just basically something that's just put on the table. That's what it sounds like to me. And how many people actually accept the concept of Negro Egyptian? How many people actually accept the term Negro Egyptian? All right. So let's go on to the next article. So let's go to where it says Y chromosome E haplogroups, their distribution and implication to the origin of Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralism, right? So by Eyob, the first was it Eyob I Gibber Masco and Montazer E Ibrahim. Okay. So right here it says archaeological and paleontological evidence points to East Africa as the likely area of early evolution of modern humans. Genetic studies also indicate that population from the region often contain, but not exclusively representative of the more basal clades of mitochondrial and Y chromosome phylogenesis. The Y chromosome haplogroup diversity in Africa, however, is present within the macro haplogroup E that seem to have appeared 21,000 to 32,000 YBP, right? And it says somewhere between the Red Sea and Lake Chad. So the combined analysis of 17 biallelic markers in 1214 Y chromosome together with cultural background of 49 population displays in various metrics, network, multidimensional scaling, principal components analysis, and neighbor join plots, all right, indicate a major contribution of East African population to the foundation of the macro haplogroup, okay, suggesting a diversification that predates the appearance of some cultural traits and the subsequent expansion that is more associated with the cultural and linguistic diversity witnessed today. All right, so it says the Proto-Afro-Asiatic group carried the EP2 mutation may have appeared at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to different major population groups, including current speakers of the Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralist population. Okay, so this came out on March 26th of 2014. European Journal of Human Genetic Advanced online publication. All right, so going down to where it talks about introduction, materials, and methods. Okay, and it goes into the Y chromosome haplotree. All right, phylogenetic analysis, genetic structure and population differentiation. Okay, and the results. All right, so how am I going to do this? Let's see. All right, so let's go to where right here it says polymorphism, like bioallelic mutation associated with the male-specific Y chromosome portion are important tools that prove essential in addressing aspect of human ancestry migration episode. Testing coalescence processes. Interestingly, some bioallelic markers of Y chromosome not only gave geographically defined distribution, but also associated with certain facets of human culture like languages and practice of pastoralism, all of which contribute to the phenomenon of genetic drift, probably the most single key element in shaping population genetic structures. All right. Intuitively, the high correlation between geographical distribution of some of the major E haplogroups and distribution of Afroasiatic languages exemplary of established correlation between languages and genes as posed by Cavalli Sofarzar permit us to revisit such correlation in a multidisciplinary platform better suited to unravel hitherto untold chapters of human history. All right. Now, let's go further down to where I'm going to skip over. So it says that the Sahel, which extends from the Atlantic to the Red Sea coast of Sudan and Eritrea and the Ethiopian highlands, including fringes of the Sahara, has witnessed human population demographic events that were pivotal in prehistoric and historic periods of human history. So early occupation by Homo sapien of the Red Sea coast of Eritrea and evidence of traces of earlier urban settlements in much of Eritrea are some of the archaeological and paleontological evidence that suggests a major contribution of this area to prehistory and migration, including the exodus of anatomically modern human beings to Eurasia. Now, why is this so important? Furthermore, in addition to the area being strikingly rich in genetic and linguistic diversity, it is one of the few remaining enclaves of traditional pastoralism, a dying human culture. So why is it important when you're talking about genetics involving here? Because again, going back to the concept about comparative method, right? Linguistic deals with what genetic relationship of the language, right? So how do you go about dealing with genetic relationship? You got to deal with the culture of the people. You got to deal with the migration period. You got to deal with the human population of that area. Okay, well, there are a lot of migration taking place because see, culture introduces language, and language goes back to culture, human culture. So you got to understand, and culture goes back to biology. All right. So you got to go to biology. If you don't have biology, then you can't have a culture. All right. And then you can't have a culture, and then you can't continue with biology without a culture. You know what I'm saying? But check this out. You got to deal with the evolution. So evolution plays a part in between biology and culture, but it's culture that keeps the evolution going. And part of the concept of evolution is dealing with languages. All right, that's the part of the culture. If you cannot have language, then how can you have a culture? And if you don't have a culture, then you don't have languages. So what was the cultural relationship like? Was there a lot of human migration taking place? What haplogroup? Did human migrate with each other, and did they interbreed with one another? What type of interbreed was taking place amongst those that are Eritrean, Ethiopian, Egyptian, up in the Levant area? Were there any type of interbreed taking place? What type of languages was borrowed? What did they bring into that culture? What did they bring into what type of lifestyle did they have? How did they communicate with one another? These are the things that has to be looked at. Okay? So let's see. Let's go down here. Go down to where it says phylogenetic analysis. So the network analysis on the chromosome carrying E haplogroups was robust enough with a main cluster near the root represented by the Kunana or Kunama, encompassing most of Eritrean and Sudanese population, including Neo-Saharan and Afro-Asiatic speakers, suggests that linguistic diversion is either a subsequent event to population diversion, language replacement, or that two linguistic families may have shared a common origin. The Southern African population, which include the Khoisan and Bantu of South Africa population, are shown to be divergent from the East African larger cluster through its connection to the Somali population. The network also suggests that the spread of the haplogroup to Southern Africa may reflect the spread of pastoralism from Northeast Africa. The Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Oman populations, on the other hand, form a Near Eastern group. The link between the Yemen and the Oman population with Afar and Sahel population from Eritrea could be attributed to the geographical proximity and possibly past genetic history. Okay, the Northern African population tend to separate into two distinct groups, one containing Moroccan Arabs and Berbers, and Sahrawi derived from the larger Eastern African group, and the other includes the Northern African population of Algeria, Egypt, and Tanzania, which forms a connection to both Europeans and Eritrean and Ethiopian, hinting to recent genetic relationship between North and East African population, as is widely believed. All right, and you wonder, why am I reading like this? Because anytime I read like this, that means it's important. That's just emphasize that it's important. That's why I'm reading the way I do. Thank you, Asar Kufu. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. So now, going down, it says the NJ tree, which was not rooted, on the other hand, was quite robust and showing similar grouping to that of the network MDS and PCA plots to imply a correlation with language and relevance to geography. With few exceptions, all population carrying the haplogroup, were either pastoralists or had recorded history of pastoralism. The population that made exception includes Hausa, Fur, and Masalit, have strong agricultural practices, while the latter is thought to have recent history of mixed farming or foraging. The other exception are Copts from Egypt and Tagagrian from Eritrea, both with documented history of agricultural practices, albeit historically part of larger communities with established pastoralist practices. The Neo-Saharan speakers and the Niger-Congo-Phoenician or Cardo-Phoenician were confined to the cluster from Sudan and Eritrea. Okay, so right here, this is important. All right, so again, you're dealing with genetics, you're dealing with the haplogroups, all right, and the human population, which contributes to the language family, all right, to which contribute to the Afro languages and etc. All right, so again, I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna keep saying it. You cannot have languages without culture, without relationship of the people, without the migration of the people. How did the people have the relationship amongst themselves and each other? How was they able to communicate? This is what you got to look at. Okay. Now, I'm not a linguist. I'm not a historian. I'm not even a teacher. All right. I'm just somebody that just like to look into information and study on information and share it. That's what I like to do. But let me just go ahead and continue on because I don't want to be on here too long. All right. So there's another book, which is called The General History of Africa, Volume 1, Methodology and African Prehistory. Okay. So by UNESCO, I know you guys probably, some of you might be familiar with that. So I'm not going to really go into that. All right. But let's go back to this. So this is very interesting. This is very intriguing to me. Linguistic ties between ancient Egyptian and Bantu. All right. So uncovering symbiotic affinities and relationship in vocabulary by Fergus Sharman. And let's see, this came out in 2014. All right. So let's see what they're talking about here. All right, so let's go to chapter 1. All right, so discovering the linguistic link, the sun rises, shine in the sky. Ancient Egyptian, okay? So again, so they're showing the hieroglyph over here. Sunrise, sun, and sky. So WMBN, I don't know what that stands for. Ra M Ptah, I'm assuming. So that's the symbols. All right, so I'm not good at reading Meta language. I'm sorry. All right, so the iconography of the writing system in the ancient Egyptian language was largely developed from established pictorial forms. Words were represented by constants with the omission of vowels. This may have been in order to save time and effort while carving the hard granite stone, which was available in the quarries of ancient Egypt. Moreover, vowels in words do not remain as stable as constants. They are likely to change with pronunciation over time. It is for these reasons that transliteration of word in ancient Egyptian displayed on a skeletal template of constants in the formation of words. However, certain vowels were classed as weak consonants and were treated as constants contrary to our understanding of what vowels are. Some of these weak consonants may include the following letters: AHIYOW, which the ancient Egyptians adopted according to their own style of accent and pronunciation and considered them to be weak consonants when describing a word in their language. As an example, A was pronounced as ah and classified as weak consonant in the ancient Egyptian language. By the way of example, the ancient Egyptian word for a dog is given by the following skeletal template of the letter Iwi. All right, so this case, although the letter I is understood to be a vowel, the ancient Egyptian considered it to be weak consonant. It is phonetically pronounced as letter E in English. So the analysis below shows how the word for a dog was deciphered. The ancient Egyptian word for a dog is Iwa. The ending A is a vowel as we commonly understand it and is derived from Bantu forms of the word for a dog. All right, so I'm gonna say this. I'm not sure how legitimized this information is as far as the connection of ancient Egyptian and the Bantu language. So I don't know how legitimized it is, but let's go down to here to where it says the antiquity relating to the words. No, let me go back up. Let me go back up. All right, so it says, after many years of detailed research, a linguistic link has been established between the ancient Egyptian and Bantu languages of Africa. The link between the languages has widely recognized in Africa, but may be little known throughout the rest of the world. This study examines lexical terms which have a common base between languages. During the period of research, substantial amounts of common vocabulary between the languages were studied. Many terms of a fundamental nature have been examined, and comparison between the ancient Egyptian language with present-day Bantu and Kiswahili Bantu languages have been uncovered and documented. All right, by examining different Bantu languages and adopting the method of comparative linguistics in a similar way to Joseph Greenberg's classification of the language of Africa, it has become possible to compare sound meaning relationship between words and their etymologies in ancient Egyptian and Bantu languages of Africa. All right, so I have called this study the Bantu Rosetta Stone, as they form the basis in understanding continents of words having common origin between the ancient Egyptian and Bantu languages. Although the ancient Egyptian language is classified as Afro-Asiatic, the language contains a substantial amount of vocabulary derived from Proto-Bantu forms, as well as will be shown. This new aspect of the ancient Egyptian language has never been previously studied. Mitochondrial DNA evidence carried out by Brian Sykes has shown that modern human beings originate in Central and Southern Africa and spread across the rest of the Africa and along the Arabian Peninsula, carrying a diffusion language. Only at a later stage did modern human begin spread north into Egypt, and the process of carrying and spreading language was repeated. The human migration out of Africa carried with it fundamental concept of words, ideas, and language, which permeates the entire length and breadth of the world. Without a proper realization and understanding of this important factor, linguists have not given enough thought to the ancient role developed by early human ancestors as they overflow from their original homeland in East Africa. The earliest wave of migrants 60,000 years ago or more went via the Arabian Peninsula, embedding African concept of words, ideas, languages as they proceed to India, Indonesia, and Australia. Later migration arrived in Asia and Europe as seen from the map. All right. So it goes down to say the antiquity related to the words and their conceptual meaning formed during the very early stages of language developed in Africa have spread across the world from Southern Africa and have now become blurred and eroded, only to be replaced by the latest phenomena of global etymology, thereby downgrading the contribution and importance of Southern Africa linguistics. There is so much to be researched with regard to the impact the early migration out of Africa had on the development of languages and the subsequent dissemination of words, ideas, concepts across the continents of the world. All right, so, and I'm just going to leave it right there, okay? I'm not going to go any further. Again, the name of this book is called Linguistic Ties Between Ancient Egyptian and Bantu. All right, so uncovering symbiotic affinities and relationships in vocabulary by Fergus Sharman. All right, so that's that, and this is the book by Joseph Greenberg. I showed you guys that earlier. Okay. Now, I'm not sure how accurate that book is as far as the linguistic ties between ancient Egyptian and Bantu. I'm not sure how accurate that book is. I'm gonna be honest with you, because like I said, I don't know a lot about ancient Egyptian language. I don't know a lot about Bantu languages, but I just have a lot of questions. Okay. I just have questions regarding to the methodology that's being used. So, can I say that his methodology is correct? I don't know. All right. That's my first time reading that information. All right. But, yeah, that's my response to Brother Wujau video and the questions I had for him and the information that I posted. So, with that being said, hopefully I'll get a chance to hear from him. And if he want me to come on his platform, right, with my questions and with my sources and with some information, whatever, I will be glad to do so. I have no problem. We can set that up. Just let me know. All right. So anyways, I'm just going to go ahead and log off of here. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you guys for those of you that are watching. Please make sure you subscribe to my channel, like my channel, share my channel, hit the notification bell, etc. And I will connect with you all later. So until then, peace and power, elevation be to all of you. This your girl Tiffany. I'm logging off saying deuces. All right.